So, after hearing all about the wild stories from part 1, you'd think the grown-ups in charge might reconsider letting kids run entire empires, right? Wrong! History is packed with even more pint-sized rulers who somehow found themselves holding the reins of power before they were old enough to drive a car, or even ride a bike. Let's jump back into the chaos with part 2 and take a closer look at more rulers who probably should have stuck to recess instead of ruling. Louis XIV, the boy who liked fancy clothes and castles a lot. Meet Louis XIV of France, also known as the Sun King. He took the throne when he was just 4 years old. While most kids were still figuring out how to color inside the lines at that age, Louis was figuring out how to run an entire country, sort of. Honestly, he was more interested in looking fabulous and building the fanciest house in Europe than actually ruling. By the time he was a teenager, Louis had turned looking good into a royal sport. He wore glittering clothes, draped himself in gold, and had more wigs than your local theater group. He loved attention so much that he built a gigantic palace at Versailles. This wasn't just any palace. It had more fountains and chandeliers than you could count, and the gardens were so big you'd probably get lost before lunch. Louis was the kind of guy who'd throw a party every night just because he could. In fact, his court was full of extravagant banquets, balls, and theater performances, while the country's problems took a back seat. The idea of actually ruling? Someone else could handle that. He had outfits to plan. But despite all his glittering glam, Louis ruled France for 72 years, the longest reign in European history. So while he was obsessed with fashion and fountains, it turns out he wasn't half bad at keeping the kingdom running, just with a lot more style than anyone else. Tutankhamun, the kid who became king and then got famous for dying. Next up is Tutankhamun, better known as King Tut, who became the pharaoh of Egypt at just 9 years old. And what did he do as the ruler of one of the most ancient civilizations? Not a whole lot. You see, Tut didn't really make many big decisions on his own. He had plenty of grown-ups whispering in his ear and taking care of heavy lifting. Basically, Tut was the royal version of a kid propped up in a high chair with someone else feeding him spoonfuls of mashed peas. While Tutankhamun's reign wasn't particularly eventful, his tomb sure was. When archaeologists discovered it in 1922, they found a treasure trove of gold, jewels, and priceless artifacts. That's the reason we all know his name today. So while Tut himself didn't accomplish much during his short reign, he became a posthumous celebrity. Pretty impressive for a kid who spent more time decorating tombs than making policies. In fact, King Tut's tomb is one of the best preserved examples of ancient Egyptian royalty, and it gave historians insight into what life might have been like for a kid ruler buried with riches beyond imagination. So while his reign was short and sweet, his afterlife fame was off the charts. Henry VI, the king who really needed a nap. Let's hop over to England to meet Henry VI, who was crowned king at the grand old age of 9 months. Now, most babies at that age are mastering the art of crawling, but Henry? He was mastering how to sleep through important meetings. As he grew older, Henry developed a reputation for being kind, gentle, and completely uninterested in running the kingdom. Henry had a unique skill, falling into long periods of silence, sometimes for days or even months. It's like he mentally checked out whenever things got too overwhelming. It didn't take long for people to realize that Henry wasn't exactly cut out for the whole king thing. And while he was taking royal snoozes, his kingdom was sliding into chaos. His reign was marked by constant power struggles between rival factions of the English court, leading to the famous Wars of the Roses, a civil war between two powerful noble families. England's nobles didn't appreciate having a ruler who seemed more interested in dreamland than reality, so Henry was eventually deposed, twice. Maybe if he had gotten a better night's sleep, history would have turned out differently. His reign was basically the royal equivalent of hitting the snooze button while the house is on fire. Not exactly the best leadership strategy. Mehmet II, the kid who took over Constantinople like a boss. While most kid rulers were more interested in glitter and naps, Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire had bigger goals. He became sultan at just 12 years old, and while his early reign was shaky, he briefly lost the throne to his dad. He came back with a vengeance in his early 20s. His mission? To conquer Constantinople, a city that had stood for over 1,000 years and was thought to be unbeatable. Mehmed wasn't playing around. He built massive cannons, some of the biggest ever seen at the time, and used clever strategies to finally break through the city's walls. When he succeeded, it was a game changer for the world, marking the end of the Byzantine Empire and the rise of the Ottoman Empire as a major power. So while most child rulers were struggling to handle their kingdoms, Mehmed was out there rewriting history. His determination to take Constantinople wasn't just about winning land, it was about solidifying his place as a legend, and it worked. Peter II, the emperor who just wanted to go fishing. Not every child ruler was a major conqueror like Mehmed. Take Peter II of Russia, for example. He became emperor at 11 years old, but he wasn't interested in politics or warfare. No, Peter had a much simpler dream. He just wanted to spend his time fishing. While his advisors were busy running the empire, Peter was out by the lake, probably imagining he was a simple fisherman instead of a boy emperor. Peter was so uninterested in royal duties that he often skipped important meetings to go hunting or fishing. His reign was so relaxed, in fact, that it almost didn't feel like a reign at all. He wasn't as dramatic as other rulers, but his complete indifference to power is what made him memorable. In the end, Peter died young at just 14 years old, never really having made much of an impact. But hey, at least he got to enjoy some fresh air. John I of France, the baby king who didn't even make it to playtime. If you thought Henry VI was young when he became king, wait until you hear about John I of France. He became king the moment he was born. Talk about a dramatic entrance. Unfortunately, his reign didn't last long at all. In fact, John I only lived for 5 days, making his time on the throne one of the shortest in history. John I didn't have time to throw parties, make decisions, or even learn to talk. But he still gets a mention in the history books. It's hard to mess up ruling when you're not around long enough to make any mistakes, right? It's almost like he became a king just to have it written on his birth certificate. But hey, at least he technically counts. Alfonso VIII, the king who was crowned before birth. Imagine being crowned king before you were even born. Sounds impossible, right? Well, not for Alfonso VIII of Spain, who was officially king while still in the womb. His father passed away before he was born, so the moment little Alfonso took his first breath, he was already a monarch. Now, most newborns are busy with crying, eating, and sleeping, but Alfonso? He had an empire to rule. Of course, like most baby rulers, he didn't exactly handle things himself. His mother, Queen Maria Cristina, took over the heavy lifting until Alfonso was old enough to do more than just burp and coo. By the time Alfonso was of age, Spain had gone through some serious ups and downs, and Alfonso himself didn't turn out to be the most successful king. But hey, if you start a life as a ruler, you're bound to have some bumps along the way. Conclusion: let's stick to playgrounds for kids, not thrones. So if there's one thing we've learned from both parts of this wild history lesson is that giving power to children rarely ends well. From kings who'd rather fish than rule, to emperors who could barely walk before getting a crown. History is full of examples that show kids just aren't ready for the responsibility. Maybe next time, let's leave the crowns to the grown-ups and let the kids enjoy their playtime. After all, who needs to run a country when you can rule the playground?